Welcome everybody. Today I want to talk about Section 44 of the West Australian Mine Safety and Inspection Act. Over the past few months I've done a number of training programs for supervisors looking at their obligations under health and safety legislation. Now, whenever I do this work for supervisors in the WA mining industry, discussion always turns to Section 44 of the Mine Safety and Inspection Act. Section 44 is a curious provision of the Act, and for reasons I can't really understand, a mythology and an industry has built up around the section. Section 44 is an administrative provision. The section says that the mine manager must appoint such competent persons to help the manager meet their obligations under the Act. But what's grown up around this is a belief that Section 44 creates some special class of legal liability for those people who actually are appointed under the section. I mean, Section 44 has spawned a whole family of what's loosely called Section 44 training, including a number of ridiculously expensive online programs. Now, I've actually done many of these programs, and as far as I can tell, they're nothing more than a rereading of the Act, and many of them are actually fundamentally misleading about the nature of Section 44, and they add very little to a supervisor's understanding of their obligations for health and safety. Except for one minor administrative matter, Section 44 creates no extra legal liability for an appointed person. It creates no liability that doesn't already exist because the person's an employee. Under Section 44, a person who is appointed must, within 7 days of being appointed, acknowledge their appointment in writing by signing both the mine's record book and any instrument of appointment. Now that's it. That is the extent of an appointed person's liability under Section 44. Section 44 training will usually talk about obligations to report hazards, and there'll be some suggestion or implication that a Section 44 appointment makes a person more responsible for hazard reporting. Now, while the Mine Safety and Inspection Act does have obligations to report hazards like any health and safety legislation, that obligation to report has got nothing to do with Section 44. The obligations to report hazards, which are set out in Section 11, apply to every person working at the mine. Whether a person is appointed under Section 44 or not makes no difference to their obligations to report hazards, and quite frankly, it makes no difference to any other obligations under the Mine Safety and Inspection Act. Really, Section 44 creates no more legal liability than a direction from the mine manager or a job description. And when you look at so-called Section 44 training, most of it has nothing to do with Section 44. It's simply a summary of the obligations under the Act, and those obligations apply to everyone who works at a mine. The biggest danger in this misleading approach to Section 44 is that people who are not appointed somehow feel their obligations are less, which of course they're not. Every person on a mine site has obligations to take care for their own safety and health and to avoid adversely affecting the health and safety of any other person. This obligation is the same for employees, supervisors and people appointed under Section 44. It's also interesting to note that there's actually no history in the West Australian mining industry of prosecuting individuals. I mean, as far as I can tell, based on available records, no one's ever been prosecuted as a supervisor, and no one's ever been prosecuted under Section 44. So if you are actually interested in giving supervisors some insight into their obligations under the Mine Safety and Inspection Act, you should carefully scrutinise what's being offered under the guise of Section 44. When we look at the prosecution of supervisors under similar legislation, so for example the Occupational Safety and Health Act in Western Australia, the prosecutions involve obvious and unreasonable departures from expected safety norms. Now, typically this includes allowing or directing workers to use machinery that's known to be unsafe, or deliberately bypassing safety procedures to get the job done. When you strip it right back, supervisors should be able to show three things to meet their health and safety obligations. First of all, they should know the health and safety risks in their area of responsibility, including for the work that they supervise. Secondly, supervisors should know how those risks are supposed to be managed. They should be able to demonstrate that they understand the policies and procedures that apply to the work they supervise. And then finally, supervisors need to know how well the health and safety risks are actually being managed. That they can describe what they do to check that health and safety risks are being managed in accordance with the policies and procedures that apply to that work, and how well those policies and procedures work to control the hazards. Thanks for tuning in today, and if you'd like any more information about health and safety obligations for supervisors or health and safety management generally, please feel free to get in touch.